Proceed. Hello. Start the speech. Yeah. Okay. Even before the book was published, A Suitable Boy, I was told that it was this fantastic tome was about to come out. I was told this by Maggie McKernan, an editor in publishing, because Vicky and I share the same publishing house, and coincidentally the same editor in the publishing house. So Maggie told me this book is about to come out. It's about India. You must read it. Blah blah blah. So and I said, "What are you doing with it?" They said, "We're putting £1 million behind its publicity, so it's bound to be popular." I said, "Let's have a look." This huge tome came out, and I got a phone call from the BBC saying, "Will you come and review A Suitable Boy?" So there I was with Vikram Seth on camera, talking to him about it. And the first thing that struck me was that the structure of the book was not so much a Jane Austen novel or a George Eliot novel. It was much more a soap opera of literature. And so I said that. I asked Vikram, was it constructed like that? And he was quite insulted. He said, nix the soap opera. He didn't want that description. I still, in my critical assessment, stick to the idea that it is soap operatic in that way. Now, what it does do, it's very excellent, it's very good, it's perfect literature in 3 different ways in presenting 3 different Indian themes. And the Indian themes are identifiable absolutely by any Indian. And the first one is the arranged marriage. And of course, in enlightened circles, the arranged marriage is done through an attempt at getting the to love each other before they meet on the marriage stage. And so Vicky picked that theme, and the choice of a suitable boy became one of the central themes of the book. Of course, that led to the second theme, love or arrangement, and that hit on the idea of the difference in India between, or the antagonism in India between Hindus and Muslims, which extends to politics as well as to personal relationships, and in this case, to marriage, to love. And she falls in love first with a Muslim boy, and of course, that is not acceptable. That theme of Hindu-Muslim carries on with a little bit added to it in a second relationship in which a politician's son, begins to love a wife, a singing, dancing consort. Let's not call them prostitutes. They're not. They're dancing girls, anarkali. And the anarkali theme becomes a little more than the Hindu-Muslim theme, because the snobbery of a politician's son falling in love with a girl who earns her money that way becomes a cultural rift. So you've got another central theme of India. And of course, the third central theme, which I found extremely interesting, is that of cultural snobbery. So the poet, who is foreign returned and has a very different culture from the gentleman who sells shoes, the third choice that she is offered. That makes that cultural difference, that snobbery that India has, extremely clear in novelistic terms. And it's quite an improvisation within the Indian novel. We've not quite seen it that way before. The contrast between somebody who designs and sells shoes and is very proud of it and offers himself as that kind of individual to the girl, and the poet Maharaja, who is in a different Indian sphere and class and cultural assumption from the shoemaker. So we're given these three pretty wonderful themes, and the themes merge and come out in extremely big ways. Not only is the Hindu-Muslim theme touched on in a possible relationship between our heroine and a Muslim boy, it's also touched upon in the political divisions that partition has brought, because it is set soon after partition, and the Hindu-Muslim political front is very much part of the novel, the antagonism there. Now, lately I was reminded of the whole novel by Mira Nair's production for the BBC of A Suitable Boy. I think the production was faithful to the book. It was very dramatic in its presentation, and it looked extremely authentic. And one of the pieces of authenticism, of course, was the costumes. And I must say here to advertise, the costumes were done by my nephew, Arjun Basim, my sister's son. So, and he did a damn good job. Now, sorry. So the only problem with it, I asked myself, and very many reviewers have asked themselves, was it the right time to do that? Shouldn't Suitable Boy have been done 20, 25 years ago when it was topical? Because somehow arranged marriages and Hindu-Muslim politics have been overtaken by events, and it seemed slightly stale in its presentation. But of course, Mira's direction was perfect, the sets were good, the costumes were great. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for that, Mr. Dondi. I'm sorry about the technical glitch at the beginning of the session. I had a slight network issue. If you didn't get it, this is Tata Literature Live, brought to you by Tata, co-sponsored by Tata Steel and Tata Projects. And this session is presented by Godrej. The flow of the session will go as such that we will have some wonderful authors, some audience members, and our favorite host, Rishi K, taking part in this session. Once the authors express their views and opinions about the books, Rishi K will take it away with the participants. Our next speaker is Kiran Manral. Kiran Manral is a best-selling author, TEDx speaker, columnist, and ideas editor with SheThePeople.tv. Ms. Manral.
Kiran, your microphone is muted.
Thanks so much, Rishi, for that introduction. And when Sashi came to me and asked me whether I'd be keen on speaking about A Suitable Boy, my first reaction was horror, because one has read so long ago. And does one really remember the book? And dare one read it again? It's 1,000+ pages. But then when I thought about it and I wondered whether is the book still relevant today, I think that gave rise to many questions in my head, and I began reading the book again. I haven't finished more than 700 pages, but the book comes back to you. The book is a book that stays with you for a lifetime, I realized. And does it earn a place in the universal canon of greatest literary works? Who puts it there? What defines a book that gets into the greatest canon of literary works? If A Suitable Boy was written today, I guess an editor would tell the author, please cut down 70% of the book, take out all the detailing. It's too huge, we can't publish it. It's not feasible. But there we have it, 1,000+ pages. It was shipped in a whiskey crate to his publishers. There was an auction that happened with an unprecedented advance. The book made headlines everywhere. Vikram Seth went on tours all over the world. And it stays with us. Why does it stay with us? What is it about this book that fascinates us so many years after it has been published, so many decades after it has been out? Is it simply the story about a young woman being forced to choose between 3 different suitors. It's much more than that. We all know that. It's a story, as Salman Rushdie did say, it's an allegory about India. It's an allegory about post-partition India, emerging fledgling into a universe where it was confronting its first democratic election. It had to prove itself worthy of being free of the colonial yoke. It was an India that was confronting conflicts, the Hindu-Muslim conflicts, conflicts of the abolition of the zamindari system, conflicts that of caste, of class, of being upwardly mobile. These were all issues that new Indians were confronting at the time. And this all comes out so beautifully in the book. It's huge, yes. And I read it back then, I must confess, very slowly. It took me, I don't know how many times I renewed that membership at the library, and my wrist must have broken by the end of it all. But it lends itself to a reading that is very immersive because there is so much detailing. Do all of us not know someone like Lata Mehra, someone who's out there trying to find a suitable girl for her daughter, a suitable boy for her daughter? Have we not confronted somebody like Lata, who is conflicted between the boy she loves and the boy who's unsuitable for her family because he comes from another class or another caste? Aren't we still fighting these things today? What is happening in our country today with the love jihad laws going on all over in various states? We're still trying to police our adults into marrying suitable boys, into marrying suitable girls. Is the book still relevant? I think it is. When Vikram Seth wrote it back then, the zamindari system was being abolished. We were going into elections. The Hindu-Muslim conflicts, fledgling, a mosque, a mandir, riots, unsuitable relationships, the ones that are talked about in the book between Saida Bai and Man, the one that are hinted about, the very subtle layers of the relationship that he couldn't talk about too openly, the one between Man and Firoz, which was brave because back then homosexuality was criminalized in India, and even to write about that with a gentle touch of a rose petal falling onto Man's shoulder, which Firoz brushes off. It conveys so much, it says so much, but still, it's not something he could say openly. He tackles so many taboos in this book. It speaks about things that we don't really acknowledge. The unpleasantness of visiting someone and almost being sexually molested, which Lata faces in Lucknow when she was, the obsession with color, with caste, with the book opens, we get to know that Lata is wearing a color that's not suitable for her complexion. We get to know time and again through the book that complexion is such an important thing. Have we still really gone away from all that? Have we moved on from those prejudices? Have we moved on from what divides us? I don't think so. I think even though the book has been so many years in the reading, and of course he wrote it for 8 years, we haven't moved on. As a country, we're still there. We're still fighting what he wrote about all those years ago, and it would be a good lesson for us to go back to it, to read it, to understand what we were against and what we should not be up against anymore. In that sense, I think the book is timeless. In that sense, I think the book is a warning and a hearkening, and we definitely all need to reread it. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Manral. Our next speaker is Raja Sen. He is a film and television critic and columnist. His book, The Best Baker in the World, is an illustrated all-ages adaptation of The Godfather. Mr. Sen.
Hi everyone. It's a pleasure to speak about a book like this, and since most people here know what the book's about, I'll talk more about my experience with A Suitable Boy. I first read A Suitable Boy during a cold English autumn. I had gotten to university before classes began, and it was a friendless time. So friendless, in fact, that I finished that book in 3 weeks. I was underwhelmed at the start. I loved verbal pyrotechnics at the time and dizzying sentences that turned in on themselves. And in contrast to stylists like Anthony Burgess, Salman Rushdie, and Thomas Pynchon, the first page of Vikram Seth's straightforward prose left me a bit dry. It felt bare. Yet, as I realized one morning while brushing my teeth, I had become so consumed by Seth's omniscient narrator that I heard a similar voiceover playing in my own head, about me, a narrator who says precisely what is going on, who warns, who speculates, and, very crucially, a narrator who editorializes just enough to hint at the author's own affections and his allegiance. A character in the book says, I have decided to volunteer you. And the narrator, while assiduously keeping the chronicle moving, slyly reflects on the unlikeliness of volunteer as a transitive verb. The voice of a suitable boy, therefore, is not only omniscient, but supremely discreet. The specificity is illustrative. The book is a portrait of India in the early 50s, a toddler unsure of itself, tottering at every bend. In vivid cinematic detail, we see people divided by caste, faith, and background, from plutocrats to paupers, from those dancing in jazz bars to those parching grain in the village. For a book this expansive, to be so playful, so light on its feet, is enchanting. The table of contents is written in rhyming couplets. A courtesan sings coolly through the heat, a hopeful lover buys a parakeet, sums up chapter 2. And there is a poetry to say its telling observations. We learn reams, for instance, from the in the books of P.G. Woodhouse. But she was very much her own character. Among her suitors, I rooted for Amit, the Bengali poet who taught Lata and me what an acrostic was. But she picked the only suitor who did not talk down to her, the one she could engage with as an equal. She picked a boy she could recommend a book to. A suitable boy ended, but I kept reading Saint. Inspired by his first novel, The Golden Gate, I wrote a dissertation at that university comprising entirely of sonnets. Lata might not have chosen him, but that didn't mean that in my For a book this expansive, to be so playful, so light on its feet, is enchanting. The table of contents is written in rhyming couplets. A courtesan sings coolly through the heat. A hopeful lover buys a parakeet. Sums up chapter 2. And there is a poetry to Seth's telling observations. We learn reams, for instance, from the way Man Kapoor, a gallant gadabout, plays cards. Seth writes, he usually held on to his cards far too long before packing them in or asking for a show. The predictability of his optimism was fatal to his chances. Seth repeatedly points to murky characters and dark motives and then floods us with context about backgrounds and limitations and mindset. A minister callously triggers a violent riot, and Seth tells us of his envies, his hairline, his exasperation, his marriage, his needs. He uses empathy like a flashlight, shining it on the people whose shoes we don't expect to inhabit. We are never meant to agree with the prejudiced, but do emerge with a deeper understanding of where that prejudice lives. Even politically, A Suitable Boy is complex, going beyond basic good, bad, self-righteous binaries to allow characters to question their own beliefs and what is being believed around them. Intellectuals in Calcutta, for instance, question the blind deification of Subhash Chandra Bose and raise an eyebrow at the level of reverence reserved for Rabindranath Tagore. Secretly, of course. This tells the reader as much about the character as the time that Seth is bringing to life. I observe more each time I return to A Suitable Boy. I recently called this tour de force a test match of a novel. Returning to it now, having already marvelled at the late cuts and the outswinging Yorkers, I find myself with a truer respect for the groundskeeping, the weather, and the pitch itself. I am at it again. This time I am reading it out loud to my wife, a few pages every night. And the language that once seemed plain now illuminates and intoxicates. The dialogue, for instance. Characters speak English, Hindi, Urdu, Bengali, and more through the book. And Seth deals with this localization brilliantly. He uses an exact transliteration of the words, so that to some readers it sounds obvious what the characters would actually have said. But to one who may not know the language, it becomes an effortlessly colourful turn of phrase. An old man talks about doctors who are of no use but to eat money. We know he must have said paisa khate hain, but eating money is exquisite. A Suitable Boy is, ultimately, about agency, about the directions the world pulls us in and how we choose our own ways forward. As a young reader, I identified with Lata Mehra, misunderstood and lovelorn, drowning my sorrows in the books of P.G. Woodhouse. But she was very much her own character. Among her suitors, I rooted for Amit, the Bengali poet who taught Lata and me what an acrostic was. But she picked the only suitor who did not talk down to her, the one she could engage with as an equal. She picked a boy she could recommend a book to. A Suitable Boy ended, but I kept reading Seth. Inspired by his first novel, The Golden Gate, I wrote a dissertation at that university comprising entirely of sonnets. Lata might not have chosen him, but that didn't mean that, in my own way, I couldn't choose Amit.
Thank you, Mr. Sen. Our next speaker, Dr. Shefali Balsari Shah, is an editor, academician, and writer. She was Associate Professor and Head Department of English at St. Xavier's College, Mumbai. Dr. Shah.
Thank you, Sarachi. I think the organizers have been rather optimistic in calling this session Book in Focus. At 1,349 pages, the book is actually pretty resistant to any kind of categorization. Within this sprawling exploration of the various forces that constituted our history about 70 years ago, there lurk a host of not always compatible strands. Take, for instance, the narrative antecedents of this novel. Seth, I think, does draw rather heavily on 19th century literary genres such as the social and historical novels of Dickens and Tolstoy, and the comedy of manners with the ironic characterization that Jane Austen does so well. Equally, and I think I agree with Ms. Lundi there, The novel is shaped by the narrative conventions of the television sagas that were in vogue in India in the early 1990s. Multi-family, multi-generation, multi-location. Serials that we all recognize like Hum Log and Bunyad. In fact, if this novel had been serialized then, I'm sure Lata would have got a host of suitors. She would have been spoiled for choice because people would have been writing into her the way they used to do for those the characters in those serials. Also evident are elements of the epics, multiple plots, stories within stories, digressions, and a host of characters who appear momentarily, do their bit, and just disappear. I think that another lens that one could talk about is that of gender. I find Saida Begum to be the most extensively and sympathetically developed character. Most of the other women merge into an indistinguished sea of shadowy stock character types, Mrs. Kapoor, Mrs. Tandon, and so on. Mrs. Rupa Mehra, and she's always called that, is in many ways our own Indianized Mrs. Bennet. She's marked by extreme sentimentality, the roses on greeting cards, her poem to Lady Baby, and she is driven by an obsession with consigning Lata, aspirations and identity be damned, to that same sea of social acceptance, which is actually oblivion. Now, many have found Lata's choice of suitor inexplicable. There is the irresistibly charming romantic hero, Kabir. It's very flattering to have an intellectual poet like Amit. After these two, can dreamy, literary-minded Lata ever really be satisfied with Harish? Harish smells of the tannery. And when he does read, he reads Hardy. Now, Thomas Hardy's sternly moralistic treatment of his heroines should surely have set some alarm bells clanging for Lata. I did wonder, why couldn't Seth have given Lata more latitude? I mean, she's academically bright. Even 70 years ago, she could have done what most young women did, enrolled for an MA course in order to buy time and postpone marriage. She could have become Ila Chattopadhyay even then. So it's strange that she's not allowed any other freedom. Is there a way to bring together the political and the personal? I think there are ways of aligning, of focusing both these lenses, of making those lens images coincide. That's if we see Lata's choices as a kind of veiled allegory. Not quite the same way that Kiran mentioned, but in a slightly different way. Both Lata and a newly independent India are, of course, on the cusp of deciding their futures. What about seeing those three suitors as possible options? Kabir can be seen to represent a kind of, well, marrying Kabir would require an absolute commitment to communal harmony, the loss of control which Lata is very scared of. She's not quite ready to make, the nation perhaps was not quite ready to make that commitment. Amit can be seen as the lingering spirit of colonialism and elitism, a certain class consciousness that's exclusive and doesn't fit in well with a newly emerging nation. Can't be justified as occupying so much space. Harish, perhaps, is the only one who represents a feasible way forward. Democracy, meritocracy, a system based on hard work and an inclination to treat everyone as an equal, a kind of confidence in oneself. This is what a new country needs. So in these three options, Lata is given a choice, as the country is given a choice, which way to move forward. I wonder though about Man. Why is Man not considered? Why does he not figure in these choices? In many ways, he's the character who shows the greatest growth in the novel. From being a self-centered, irresponsible wastrel at the beginning, he actually develops, he's ultimately educated and humanized in different ways by several forces, but I'll mention only Saida Begum. And in some ways that was what the courtesan did in the old days. By Rashid, by the time that he spends in the villages. So by the end of the novel, he actually has passion, vision, commitment. He just might be the most promising option for the future. They do say that bad boys who reform are usually a pretty safe bet. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that, Dr. Balsari Shah, and to our other authors for their wonderful insights and memories. You know, when a novel has 1,349 pages in it and 5,91,552 words in it, then the readers of this tome are definitely going to have a lot to say about it. And that's exactly what we're going to do in our next section with Hrishikesh. Hrishikesh Kannan, or Hrishi K as he is popularly known, is an award-winning radio and podcast host, creator and producer. Over to you, Hrishi K, and this wonderful room full of people.
Well, I have to say this, having moderated two previous sessions of the Book in Focus, which is George Orwell's 1984 and Salman Rushdie's Midnight's Children, that Dr. Shah, Kiran Mandral, Farooq and Raja have been the best behaved thus far. I mean, we've had cases in the past, irreverent passages read out, questioning George Orwell as the legend that he's made out to be. We've had authors, writers going up on stage at the NCPA, questioning whether Rushdie should have got the Booker of Bookers at all in the first place for Midnight's Children. So on the whole, I think Farooq, Raja and Dr. Shah and Kiran were very effusive with their kindness as far as that is concerned. Okay, this is where I come in. This is literally what we envision as a book club. Just a few book lovers getting together and talking about a novel, good, bad or ugly, but popular nonetheless, and venting their feelings. And we'll try and be a little civil about it, if that is even possible online. I request all the audience members to keep your video on and your audio off. And basically, if you wish to make a point, if you want to speak about the book, all you have to do is raise your hand in digital terms, which means you go onto your control bar and you will see a sign of a palm, and you can just click on that once and you will pop up on my screen, and I will thereby ask you to speak forth. Now, it could be a question that you want to address to the four speakers. It could be your opinion, or it could just be something you want to throw into the fray for the rest of us to discuss. So the field is really open, and that's why we call it an open discussion. Okay, let's get right down to it. Preliminary thoughts from me, and I'm going to start with getting Farooq to respond to this. I mean, you've really taken the words out of my mouth by calling it a soap opera. Much as people will liken it to Tolstoy and Austen, the fact of the matter, and Dr. Shah emphasized on this later on, is that, there's a lot of bunyad and hum log in there, and many people aren't complaining about that. But really, I think what you did talk about was the whole Hindu-Muslim situation as written by Vikram. And I'd like to add on to that, saying that it's quite beautiful that he would also talk about secularism, because if you look at the relationship that the Nawab of Baitar has with Mahesh Kapoor, who's the revenue minister, it is a pure example of what Nehru's secularism was projected or meant to be. And I thought that it was pretty interesting. Would you agree with me on that front, Farooq, that there was as much secularism as there was the Hindu-Muslim feud?
I absolutely do agree with you, and one sees that in all aspects of India, and not only in the upper classes, but even in the rural classes. You can see that there was a kind of a leaning towards secularism. It's only the political exploitation of religious fanaticism that has divided the the population of India in a rather nasty way. I mean, one can see that in most democracies. You can see that in the UK. We have just seen that today, or we are still seeing it in the USA. There is a political use of deviating from the kind of harmony that a modern democracy needs. Or perhaps it is the definition of democracy that we can vote for Trump, or that we can vote for Modi or Boris Johnson. And there's no doubt where Vikram Seth's feelings lie, where his mentality lies, right? And so also with all the historians that came out of the 1930s, 40s, 50s, 60s, they were all for sectarianism, and some of them brushed the difficulties of, or the cruelties of Muslim rule or caste rule or whatever under the carpet in the interests of secularism. And I think that is the background through which Vikram Seth worked his novel. Of course, later on, in modern times, new historians have arisen to kind of highlight the cruelties that Indian history is riddled with, and that is in a political cause. So one sees in the novel not only the battle between the absurdities that partition has caused, the antagonisms that it has encouraged, but you also see the friendship between Muslims and Hindus and the possibility of love.
And you must understand, I mean, students of literature would know this, and Dr. Shah would also testify to this, that, it was written in the 90s, and it speaks about the 50s. So it's an equal testament to the times that Vikram wrote it in, as much as it is about the time that he set it in. And the Babri Masjid did come down on the 6th of December 1992, and The Suitable Boy released in 93. I am going to continue. I have some thoughts for Kiran, for Dr. Shah, as well as Raja, but let's take a point of view from Susan Lobo now. Susan, can we have you? Would you unmute yourself and start speaking? Susan.
Yeah. Good afternoon, everyone. And a special hello to Dr. Shefali, who was my professor at St. Xavier's College. I just wanted to share, my experience of reading the book. So when I had to do it in 2 attempts. And the first time I gave up after a few pages, and the exact words were in my mind were daily soap. I said, I don't want to read a daily soap. Just get on with it. This interminable narration didn't seem to want to go from point A to point B. So I just set it aside. That was many years ago. And then I picked it up again, and I happened to be teaching Pride and Prejudice to my first-year students. And the parallels then, were just too many to ignore. But I won't go into that. I just felt somehow that the novel has, 2 halves. There is a love story, and then there is the, historical, political documentation. And very much in the kind of style of Balzac, who, considered himself a kind of recording secretary. I thought Seth was kind of trying to do 2 things at the same time, be a storyteller and also be a historian, documenting every possible thing for posterity. And I just somehow felt that the 2 halves kind of remained distinct and disparate, never really seamlessly blended into each other. But then what I felt was that another way of looking at it would be that, you have the everyday reality, the mundane world of marriages and survival and everything. And then you have the world of poetry and music and song, the aesthetic world. And I felt that that is where the blending happened, where the world of everyday, sometimes sordid reality, and the world of, the aesthetic realm, which we normally see as being antithetical and separate, just kind of blended together. And I thought it happened best, let's say, in the relationship between Saida and Man, where he gives her this book of Ghalib's poems, and she says, I've received many gifts, many glittering things, but this is the best one. And then he has to ask her to translate some of the Urdu lines, and she has to ask him to translate some of the English lines. And I thought that in that I saw a kind of a message where Said seems to be privileging the aesthetes in the book, and kind of saying that an appreciation for what is beautiful and for art and poetry is what can help us bridge the divide, whether it's a class, caste, gender, language, ideology divide. Ma'am also asked the question, is there a way of aligning the personal and political? I thought it happened in this particular realm.
Wonderful, wonderful point. Susan, thank you very much for that. Kiran Mandral, Kiran, I really want to laud you because you actually delved into something that nobody else on the panel or the speakers spoke about, which is that A Suitable Boy is actually a very popular book amongst the LGBTQ community because it was way ahead of its time. And indeed, the relationship between Firoz and Man, subtle as it was a precursor of what the nation was going through at the time, and then subsequently we've seen that evolve. And I laud you for bringing that point across. Also, the fact that you talked about the election and the zamindari system. And I want you to expand on that a little bit. To me, I thought it was so interesting when Man goes to the village and actually understands what the landowner goes through vis-a-vis the peasant. And that must have been of particular interest to you too, Kiran.
I found, as Shefali did say, that Man was the most interesting character in terms of the growth that he shows throughout the book. And the fact that he at first comes across as a speckless character who is engaged to this girl in Banaras, not interested in getting married, not interested in the business. But then through the book, the way he evolves, he is constantly on a search for growth, I felt, whether even through his relationship with Saida, where he was searching for growth, then his trip to the village with Rashid, where he comes across all that he has not been exposed to so far. It's like, put it in contemporary terms, if I send my son to the village right now, it's a world he's completely not exposed to, and it comes as quite a shock to him as to what the actual issues are that the people are there, and the privilege that comes with him being the son of the revenue minister, and the pressure on him to give favors, to provide, so as to be a proxy for his father in many cases. So in all that, I think Man comes across as the character I felt really stood out for how he depicted the interplay between urban and rural India, the growth process that he went through, as also, as Shefali ma'am very rightly said, why can't we see how he emerges at the end as somebody who blends culture as well as who is culturally an aesthete of sorts, but also is trying to reconcile himself with the two disparate sides of the country that he's seeing and trying to make sense of the entire thing. With the zamindari system, as we saw in the book, and it was abolished, of course, we all know back then, but we're still grappling with those issues, Rishi, all these years now. So in that sense, the book has been very prescient, and we still see the dispossessed, we still see the issues they're facing, we still have bonded labor in our villages. Have we really come far from that? What Man saw then, what we're seeing now, I think we're still in a process of finding ourselves as a nation, as a country.
Okay, we've got Akshiti Vats. Akshiti, who's raised her hand. Akshiti, would you put your point of view across, please?
First of all, thank you everyone on the panel for sharing your thoughts on the book, and everyone who's here. I read this book a few years ago, but I really love it. I always come back to it and think about it often, especially in light of the show that came out. And I just wanted to share a quick point of view, which was that I feel like this book, amongst the many that I've read, does a really good job of not trying to be prescriptive in what it means for India to be a country. And it's set in the 1950s, so it's when India is really emerging as a new country. But I feel like a lot of literature, but also more obviously politics, really delves into this is what it means to be Indian, or this is what the Indian experience is. And this book, I think, more than most, does a really evocative and very descriptive job of saying that there is no one linear way of understanding the Indian experience and belonging to it. And as everyone on this panel knows, that there's so many different ways, and that's kind of what Kiran, speaking before me, was talking about as well. But I think Seth does this exquisite job of saying that this is what India is like in terms of religion, in terms of the urban-rural divide, of course, across lines of caste and gender as well. But I think that's just one of the things that really draws me to this book, is that he chooses not to prescribe, but rather describes, and of course describes very extensively. So the passage of time and place is also very evocative and really serves that point well as well, because we go to so many different locations across the country with Seth during the duration of the book. So I really enjoyed that aspect of the novel. Thank you.
And we really enjoyed your point of view. It's wonderful. The way, how eloquent are you? Thank you very much, Akshiti Vats. Show of hands, all you have to do is go to your control panel. You will see a palm. If you click on that, it will illuminate my screen, and I will call upon you to speak. I want to go to Raja Sen. Raja, wonderful. You gave us 5 minutes of bliss on A Suitable Boy. A couple of things that are very important to me, because I've actually had a conversation with Vikram Seth about this. Now, you did say that Burgess, Rushdie, what his style of writing is nothing like them, right? This is realism. And in my conversation with Vikram, I realized that he looks down upon academics and research scholars and the way they view novels to be written, and he actually prides himself on the realism and of being able to tell the story for the story's sake, as opposed to how it should function in a scholastic way. So I think that's a very important point that you made, and I love the fact about it being like a test match, it being the long format. And a very, very important point that you made, and as a Bengali yourself, to make that point, saying intellectuals question Netaji Subhash Chandra Bose and Rabindranath Tagore, which was kind of blasphemic if you look at it, because it's not known to be done openly, but it did happen in the book. So I think those were very, very valid points that you put across there. I'd like you to just talk about the political setting, while this book plays out. The fact that in 1951-52 we were going through our first major election. There was a wave of socialism. At the same time, corruption was rearing its ugly head for the first time. Was that of particular interest to you at all, Raja?
No, absolutely. The book obviously acts as a time capsule. Even these things that we are saying, I don't think in Calcutta drawing rooms today would be discussed with as much modernity going forward, because Bose or even Tagore at that point of time were as canonized as they are now. So there is a level of reverence that has become exaggerated over the years, which is why Kobi Guru is considered Kobi Guru and beyond reproach, and you can't say he was a passable poet in that sense. So I think that comes through in the book a great deal. The fact that that politically there is so much unsurety. When you look at Man's father, and you look at Mr. Agarwal, and you look at the various ministers and their agendas, they are coming at the same problem with different perspectives. It's not as much a left versus right polarization. It's basically they're all trying to kind of achieve the same things. Even when they're in the same party, the people are trying to achieve the same thing. They're just very unsure about how to go about it. There's still no real template in place. There's still no real Congress per se. There is this, the book has a lot of characters talking very passionately against Nehru. for example, and then it also has the other side. But it does have that, the fact that these people were not really sure. I mean, all the things that we consider, 40 years after the book is set is when Seth wrote it, and all the things that we considered so entrenched in terms of public opinion and this is what is said and this is what is not said was unclear at the time. So there is that to the book. And just coming back to what you said, Rishi, about how the language. I mean, I say it stands out a little to me also because Seth himself is not an unstylish writer. When you read The Golden Gate or when you read anything wherever he's lyrical, he's having so much fun with the language. He's always playing with it. Even in Equal Music is a very lyrical book. So this is really a way where he was kind of letting, possibly my take on it is that because he had so many characters and so many perspectives to enact, he let them do the talking and he himself said, let me try and at least sound. I mean, it's a pretense, of course, but let me try and sound dispassionate and let me try and sound like a straightforward chronicler, even though what I'm telling is not at all a straightforward chronicle.
Yeah, I think that is quite remarkable, to willfully want that to happen. To willfully make sure that happens as a writer, especially when you have to stay true to the test match, the 1,300 whatever pages. May we have Gayatri Srivastava? Sorry, Raja. Yes.
I'm saying there's a part of the book where he compares. Amit is talking to Lata, and Amit, of course, is pretty much the Seth character in the book, and he talks about a rag, the singing and the performance of a rag as to the writing of a novel and about how its various digressions are. And I think it's a really beautiful way to analyze how this guy, at that point, like Amit writing his first novel, was really finding his feet.
May we have Gayatri Srivastava? Gayatri, thank you for raising your hand. We'd like to hear what you'd like to say, Gayatri, please.
Firstly, I want to say thank you to all the panelists. It's been so enriching listening to all your thoughts. Like Raja said earlier, I'd like to share my personal experience with the book. I read the book in 1993, just when it was published. It was gifted to me by my brother-in-law. I had just finished class 12. I was about to join college. But the minute I picked up the book, I fell in love with it. Unlike the previous speaker who said that, after 2 pages, she didn't like it. But I just loved it so much. I remember reading it with the same amount of concentration as I had given my economics and political science subjects earlier. And it was 93, and I identified with Lata. And, just like my life was, about to, my suitors was, so to speak, supposed to appear, because I was only 19 then. And then anyway, I thoroughly enjoyed the book. And this year, 2020, on my daughter's 18th birthday, I gifted her a copy of A Suitable Boy, because Seth is my favorite author and this is my favorite book, and I thought she must read it, she must have it. And she read about 700 pages, and then she said, Mom, you remind me of Mrs. Lata Mehra. And I was like, life has come a full circle from being Lata to now being identified by Mrs. Lata Mehra. So I think that's what makes the book so timeless. I mean, the fact that we are still talking about it. It's 27 years, it's nearly 30 years, but it's still so relevant because the characters we can identify and then move from here to there. But thank you, and I just want to make a comment to what Farooq Dhondi said about the Meera Nair presentation. I did not enjoy it too much, sorry to say. The costumes were lovely, the setting was lovely, but the adaptation was too Western. I didn't think it was for an Indian audience, and I don't think it was very true to the book in terms of, I think this book, the pleasure is in the storytelling as much in the story, and that storytelling was lost in Meera Nair's production. Those are my personal thoughts. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much for that, Gayatri. In the idea of having an open discussion or even having a book club online, and you know what Tata Little Life stands for, which is Virtual Festival Real Books, is you sharing your personal anecdotes. And it was wonderful that you talked about the relationship that you have with this book, and now that you've passed it down to the next generation. And I have to say, I mean, it's incorrect of me to speak too much about the televised series which went on BBC and eventually on Netflix now, because Meera is a friend of mine, but in Mira's defense and Andrew Davies' defense, Andrew Davies is the screenplay writer, whose job it was to take this voluminous text and make it into a short series, is that it's not easy to do.
No,
What do you leave
easy.
out? What do you leave out? What do you leave in? You know, so...
It's not easy. That's why it's probably not been adapted. It's taken so long for an adaptation to come, but I think there should be an Indian adaptation. It shouldn't be, a BBC funded. Maybe one of the Indian production houses should take it up and do a proper Indian adaptation. It's a book that requires it. It deserves it.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Okay, I want to come to Dr. Shah now. All of you audience members, please keep your video on, keep your audio off, muted, and just click on that palm insignia that is there on your control bar, and it shall light up here, and I will ask for you to speak. But Dr. Shah, it was such a lesson listening to you. It's small wonder then that your students are waxing eloquent about all that they've learned from you. And you've actually echoed a sentiment that I had when I first read A Suitable Boy, and then I had to read it the second time around to moderate this particular session, is that Vikram's mother herself was such a powerful, defining lady, perhaps the first lady Chief Justice of this country, accomplished in the law. And here was he writing a book in which you could question the strength that these women have. And you're right. I mean, in a lot of ways, Saida Begum is the strongest woman on view, as far as the book is concerned. And you did put forth a list of possibilities, but it did irk me. I don't know if it does you, that the women don't come across as strong as they should come across, perhaps.
Am I audible?
Yes, you are. Yes, you are.
Okay. Yes, that was something which really bothered me as I was reading the book, because especially with Lata, I kept thinking, you have options, and even in the 50s there were options, clearly, because Vikram Seth's mother went on to become a judge, and even Savita decides to start studying law. So why is Lata in this dreadful hurry to get married? Okay, her mother wants her to, but why is she succumbing to it? It just didn't make sense. As for the other women, I felt that they're there, but not enough is made of them. Of course, when Mrs. Kapoor dies, then her family starts appreciating her. But that's so sad. And that is what happens in reality, that women are missed only in their absence.
I'd like all four panelists to respond to this. Has this book aged well? There is a point of view that says, in an era of Tinder and dating apps, where parents have a limited say, at least in urban India, as to where their child is going to get married, it doesn't hold relevance. Others say it does, because we're going through rural India still remains unchanged in a lot of ways. Satellite townships have that arranged marriage challenge. And at the other end of the spectrum, politically, what we're going through in the country right now, what you could argue a lot of people call nationalism, other people call it extreme right-wingism. Again, we see that in the backdrop of Vikram Seth's A Suitable Boy. Has this book aged well? Is it completely relevant today? Farooq Dondi, let's start with you.
Let me say that it really belongs to its time. The themes which I talked about earlier, the arranged marriage, the clash between religions, and the snobbery between class and culture, those absolutely obtain. And so anybody reading the book today will see that there is an absolute truth in it. And in that sense, the book has lasted. I don't think that one can do that book again. But let me say one thing about the language which people have been talking about here. The book is written entirely in English. Raja pointed out that some of the transliterations of Lucknowi or Urdu or Hindi or rural language even are translated into English in an efficient way. As far as I'm concerned, the master of turning Indian languages into English is, please don't attack me, Rudyard Kipling. And he did that so expertly. Now people have attacked. People have attacked this Mera Nair's adaptation for not having Urdu in it, for not having Hindi in it. Andrew Davis was adapting a book which is entirely in English. There is no Hindi or Urdu in it. And yet, Mira has put into certain scenes Urdu pieces. And people speak as they would perhaps naturally. So I think that attack is slightly off beam. And the other thing I'd say about language, which Raja Sen pointed out, is I make a distinction in two sorts of prose. There is the sort of prose that Suitable Boy has, and that somebody like V.S. Naipaul champions. I would call that window pane prose. You look right through it, through the clear glass, to the object it is describing, to the object beyond. The other kind of prose, which of course, again, Raja brought up but didn't say, is stained glass prose. So the sentence itself, as you're trying to look, you're looking at the sentence itself, the language use, rather than the object beyond which the language is trying to describe. And that is a prose which can lapse into vanity and conceit in a writer's work. So all praise to Vikram for, in this case, using window pane prose.
Okay, I've just been given a heads up. We've got only a couple of minutes. So Dhriti Hundia. Dhriti, one of our audience members, has raised her hand. Dhriti, you'd like to say something, please?
Am I audible?
Okay. Yes, you are, please.
Yeah. So I think you posed a question about how relevant this is today. And
Dhriti, we need
yes,
your video on. Yes, please. Yes, go.
My video is on? Yeah.
Yes.
And yes, we've got a lot of Tinder today and a lot of dating apps today, which, give us options, even urban India as such. But parents are still going to be happy to let you choose, but the choice has to be from a limited sort of panel. If still today a Hindu-Muslim intercaste marriage is going to be questioned. So choice is there definitely, but not in that expanse. But also the book will not hold relevant in the fact that I do feel that the women characters could be written much more well, could be given more growth, because except Saida Begum, I have not seen that. When we see Lata, I as a college-going student, we want to idolize the characters, we want to feel like them. So sometimes I feel like her spirit is not, or she could have been more revolting, a little more fierce. But yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay, quickly, Rahila and then Tina. Those are our last two speakers because we're going to wrap. Rahila, we'd like you to say something.
Hi, can you hear me? Am I audible?
Yes, Rahila, you are. Yes.
Hi, I wanted to thank everybody because I read the book this year itself and I really missed having a book club to discuss it in. And so this was really fantastic. I'm so happy to be part of this. And I just wanted to share one point because we're running out of time. When I finished reading the book, I felt really lost for many days after it. I felt like I had this thing with me all these months, and then something was gone, and I was very upset with Lata's choice in the end. So I was very disturbed, and then I didn't have anybody to discuss it with. So this is great because this is kind of closure for the book ending in a way that I was very disappointed in the way.
Yeah, it's like Raja says, why didn't she go with Amit? It's like Dr. Shah says, exactly. What's wrong with Man?
Exactly. I also hoped for Man in between somewhere, and I was like, what, Lata? Why are you doing so?
Thank you very much, Raila. Tina Nagpal. How are you, Tina? Can we hear from you, please? Yes.
Hi. Yes, I'm great. This has been such a wonderful discussion. I actually, in fact, Rahila said almost exactly what I was going to say. I read this book similar to Raja's experience. I read it in 1993 when it came out. I was just beginning grad school and I was friendless. And I read the first half of the book completely breathlessly, like I was so immersed in it. And about halfway through, I realized that it's going to end. And then I didn't know what would happen to my life. So I stopped reading it breathlessly, and I would literally read one page for breakfast, one for lunch, and one for dinner. And I was similarly bereft when I finished the book, and it took me months to find a friend like that again. So it was such a beautiful experience. I've loved the analysis, but I've got to say it's a book that stays with you just from the experience of it. So that was mine. Thank you so much.
Very well put. Very well put, Tina. It's unfair for me not to ask Raja, Kiran, and Dr. Shah that question that I asked Farooq. So just quickly, please. I'm sorry, we don't have any time left. Maybe in just a couple of sentences. Kiran Mandal, has it aged well? Is it still relevant today? Your thoughts. Unmute yourself, please. Unmute yourself.
I would say bits of it. Can you hear me? Yeah. I would say bits of it are relevant, bits of it aren't. I think we still expect girls to get married to the boys of our choice. We're still policing adult women in their marital choices. And I think we have love jihads, as I mentioned before, because of that. But I think to read a book of this size when we have the attention span of a goldfish these days is rather challenging. So in that sense, I think I would challenge that part of it having aged well. That's about it.
Thank you very much. Raja Sen, has a suitable boy aged well, my friend?
I would say it has. When the series came out recently, it came out at around the same time that Netflix released a series called Indian Matrimony. Yes. Indian matchmaking, which is all about arranged marriages and which is very current reality TV. So we haven't moved as far ahead as we would like to believe we have. And in certain aspects, we probably moved back a little bit. So I think the book's aged beautifully because it's not just about Lata and, regressive things being forced on her. We are seeing people around her who are, living very much their own life in as progressive a way. Her friend Malti or Meenakshi, who are all having their own glamorous, exciting lives as happens today. So I think the book has aged perfectly well.
Dr. Shah.
All over again, it's working perfectly.
Dr. Shah.
I fear that the relevance of the book is apparent if you just turn on your television or read the newspaper, watch the news. That's how relevant the book is. What hasn't survived the book, I fear, is the innocence that we have. The book has a certain kind of innocence which our present time does not allow. I'm sorry, but that's the way it is.
Wonderful. What an incredible kaleidoscope of views, and that's what the book in focus has been all about. And I have to say, in the series, in George Orwell's 1984, Salman Rushdie's Midnight's Children, and now A Suitable Boy by Vikram Seth, this is the best audience participation and the back and forth of views that we've ever had. So really, virtual festival, real books, and big ups to all your audience members and also panelists for reacting to the points of view that were put across. And I thought the book club atmosphere was best done this year in year 2020. Well, that's it from me then. Cheers. Thank you very much for watching us, listening to us, wherever you are.
Thank you. Thank you so much for summing that up so well, Rishike. I'd like to take this opportunity once again to apologize for the beginning. We were experiencing some technical difficulties and I didn't realize I was live. The pitfalls of tech and going live, just enough to give anyone nightmares. Once again, I'd like to thank our audience members, our participants and our authors, and our sponsors, Tata Group and session sponsor Godrej. We still have a host of wonderful sessions lined up for you today and tomorrow, so please do check them up on our website, tatalitlive.in. At 4:45 today, we have Speaking My Mind, a talk on mental health. Hope to see you there.